you, Mahesh. Congratulations on this great program that we are, I think, one of the only programs that has an alternative viewpoint for Sri Lanka. So it's excellent. Coming back to Dhananath's analysis, I mean, clearly the way out of it, this whole situation is through growth. But unfortunately, the parameters of growth are not institutionalized. What I tell you is what Bhanuka is saying about investments, right? If you look at what the IMF has ring-fenced in ironclad hands, is that you can't get out of this. We don't have fiscal sovereignty, we don't have monetary sovereignty. Without these two variables, which are hugely dependent on what Bhanuka is saying in terms of investment, you can't think of growth. And that is clearly projected in the IMF projections. It says our GDP growth, which is in a balance sheet sense, because I like to talk in numbers where finance people can relate to this, because otherwise we are talking paradoxically, as Dhananath said, and this paradox has led to us to misunderstand and misrepresent the facts relating to growth, particularly in the Sri Lankan context. Since 1965, we have been running this paradox. This paradox has been with the IMF institutionalizing certain framework where we can't get out of it. And every cycle, we get a 5-year cycle, we come out of it, we go back to it willingly. Similar we saw in 2019. Look at the 2019 numbers. In 2018, our GDP was $94 billion. Today, we are at $83 billion. So where is the improvement? None. Because GDP is nothing but your top-line revenue. In a company's income statement, your GDP at current market prices is your revenue. If your revenue is not growing, the underlying microeconomy cannot grow. That's a given. We saw that in 2016 to 2000. Many times you go back in history, you see the dip in your revenue numbers. A dip in the revenue is detrimental from any standpoint of view, and therefore to address investment, it's not foreign direct investment. We must look at domestic investment, because look at the capital formation numbers. No one is going through those numbers, unfortunately. Capital formation is bulk. Domestic capital formation is bulk of it. 35% is domestic capital formation. 6 of it comes from public investment. Balance 2% comes, actually it's 30% in all, now it's about 37. If you take the aggregate numbers, about 27 is domestic capital formation. Government spending has been around 5, right? So that's 31. About 2%, 3% is from foreign direct investment. And for foreign direct investment, we are trying to turn this whole economy around and look at all the indexes as possible to generate this kind of FDI. So Dilip's question and Dhananath's answer doesn't tally. Again, we are coming to paradoxes which Dhananath is referring to and which he alluded to in his earlier conversation. Inflation primarily is driven in Sri Lanka by its consumer basket, right? If you look at the index, there is a huge weightage in this index on consumer items. Now, in these consumer items, there is a huge weightage on import-driven consumer items. That is pegged to the exchange rate, including of inputs on agriculture, right? If you look at our agriculture, from seeds to fertilizer to the transportation, 60% of our cost is import-driven. Only there is a 30 to 40% value addition from agriculture. I got these numbers from the agricultural people. It's about talking to them. So when you have an inflation anchor by the way of the exchange rate, and that moves, and you let that go, that's what the IMF prescribed. One of the key criteria in every IMF mission is to let your exchange rate free float. Now the drag on that particular thought process is huge, not only to the inflation basket, but to your debt also. And I'll come to the capital side of it, right? Debt, because we have got two balance sheets in the country. One, we have got a dollar balance sheet, we have got a rupee balance sheet, right? And your liabilities are all marked in dollars because you've got $38 billion in external debt, out of which only 14 billion is commercial debt. Balance 24 is multilateral and bilateral debt, right? So that dollar-denominated balance sheet, it has a direct impact, and that is shown in the Central Bank annual report. No one reads it. It's shown in the Ministry of Finance. I urge Dhananath to look at it, right? They don't do it. They come and use parables in the general media, and therefore this misleads the general public. Look at give me one more minute, Mahesh. It's important. The cost of debt has increased from the government's balance sheet by 5 trillion. 5 trillion. The loss to CPC As a result of the exchange rate loss, it's shown as operational loss. It mentions in the Minister of Finance annual report. I urge Minister to look at it. It's not mentioned because they cover their sins in this thing, and it's passed on to the general public and to the entrepreneurs. The cost of debt servicing has increased by 500 billion. CPC, because they have $3 billion worth of external debt. Their balance sheet is in rupees. How can they generate income? They can't when suddenly the government takes a decision. So give me your last minute. 890 billion worth of shock in terms of debt servicing on the SOE balance sheets, including CEB, Petroleum, Sri Lankan Airlines. CEB 600 billion, CEB 200 billion, CPC 590 billion, and Sri Lankan Airlines 100 billion. Put that into your debt stock. Put that into the debt servicing. Then you look at the ratio. Our debt to GDP increased from 101 billion to 104 billion in 1 year. We are getting 2.9 billion from the IMF. Now this is the madness. Okay, Mahesh, I think it's a very a great point that we have come to in terms of what is our GDP focus. Now Chaturanga very correctly said industrialization is the way forward, and I totally agree. Looking at all the Southeast Asian countries, how they manage their economy, including Vietnam. Vietnam, if you look at the research out there, very categorically say that the government intervention and government-led support enable them to reach their export targets. So if you take the vehicle as GDP, the vehicle's 4 tires are the policy framework. If you want your vehicle to travel down a particular path and achieve a particular destination in terms of GDP revenue, you have to have your fiscal policy, you have to have your monetary policy, you need to have industrial policy, and you need to have an export strategy policy. If you don't have those 4 wheels turning in the same direction, you're not going to get to that destination. And I think which Chaturanga is now saying is very important, because they seem to be getting that equation right. So I think if you can look at that, because the elephant in the room is our trade deficit. From 2014 to 2023, $109 billion have gone out of this country. So we can't afford that anymore. We have to internalize our savings. From a pure balance sheet point of view, you need to internalize. If you internalize, your national savings increase. If you increase your national savings, your debt stock will come down. If you increase that and internalize through agriculture, through what Banuk and them are doing, through various industries where we are spending our trade, our hard-earned money through our current account, we are subsidizing our trade account. That is services which Banuka brings, the remittances that we get in our secondary account, those are used to subsidize the trade deficit. That's where we are going wrong. That is the core issue. And then when that is not sufficient, we go and borrow. And that leads us into a debt spiral, because you depreciate the currency. That's what they tell you. To curtail your economy, you have to have a shock. Then you say foreign exchange. It's very sweetly put in this IMF burden. They say to accumulate reserves. So everyone thinks that's the best way, but that is the worst, because you're shrinking industry, you're depriving capital formation, you're putting people on the street, and you're actually jacking up your cost of debt. Because your cost of debt is in a dollar balance sheet. Your revenue is your rupee balance sheet. So they have to service your debt stock is up. So you have to be very careful about these particular nuances that have been pushed by lack of data. Secondly, the last point before I go to Derana, there is no relevance in money stock. You look at what the RBI has written in. I mean, this is a controversial subject, because you must understand what is driving inflation. If you take world GDP, world excess money stock, put it on a chart. Ask Derana to do it and show it to every one of us. See where the world money stock, excess money stock, I hope he knows the definition of excess money stock. That is money stock M2 minus your GDP number, right? Divide that by your debt stock. Look at that. That's your excess money stock. Look at that against inflation. It has come down from 2020, from 2002. Sri Lanka is no different. There is no correlation. How money gets into the system and how inflation comes about is when you move the anchor. Your key anchor is your exchange rate. As you increase your exchange rate, the credit cost or the credit facilities have to go up. And when your credit facilities go up, bank has to generate it from its reserves money. When the bank doesn't have reserve money, it goes to the central bank. Central bank has to pump money. Otherwise, there's a liquidity shortfall in the system. That's why you get a liquidity deficit in the market. To facilitate that liquidity, central bank puts in money. So the sequence is not money first. It's a result of external shocks driving money supply. If you don't increase Tanya's working capital and Dilip's working capital, how is you going to run your business? You can't. It's tied to that. So this myth has to be debunked. Look at what the RBI said. Look at the data. Look at Sri Lankan data. I dare you to do that.